everything is relationship based, everything is experience based. If you allow bad seeds to kind of exist on set, it can just poison the entire system.
And so next time that client's not going to come back to you guys.
Yeah, because like what are they going to remember at the end of the shoot? Like they got reamed out by some random person that was on set. It's very difficult to be creative. It is a very creative industry where if you're thinking about like, can I even afford to eat?
Yeah.
You're not thinking about being creative. Like those ideas suddenly shift very quickly because now you're in this like super pressure cooker space.
It's just like, trust me.
Yeah. We don't play trust me games when like $50,000 is on the line, $100,000 is on the line. It's like you need to know this person is capable and can actually do the work that you're telling them you can do. Welcome back to the Unfold podcast. Today we have Juanjo here with me, Jason, and we're talking about the 5 biggest financial mistakes that production companies and directors make in 2025. And these are the skills and things that we've learned as lessons over the years that we've realized actually like make a big difference in terms of how we run our business, how we stay sustainable. And it's oftentimes a big problem because a lot of people go about this business and just like charge their regular rates, or like they work with the wrong people, or they build the business off of the wrong foundations. And those are all things that like really hold you back in terms of growing into the future, working with bigger brands, and like having big clients like agencies actually trust you. And so we're going to break all that down today, step by step.
And if you're one of our YouTube viewers, you might have noticed that we're in this brand new space.
Swanky.
Yeah.
So we're actually going to dive right into it. So number 1.
Well, speaking from personal experience, after me and my friends started our little production company and we started making some shmoney, we were like, what should we spend all of this money on? What do you think people should not spend their money on?
Well, it's a great question. I think number 1 too is everyone starts to think about buying gear. Is that like a thing that you were thinking about?
That was the number 1 thing we're like, maybe we should buy a light.
Yeah. Like in some cases and scenarios, that's actually not too bad of an idea. Like if you have absolutely nothing, if you don't have a camera, then I'd be surprised you even got to this place. But if you started doing some jobs and stuff like that, you kind of have 2 paths. Investing in gear kind of has like a limit to it. Once you get to a certain place, it's kind of like diminishing returns. So you're not really going to get that much more out of what you buy, right? Yeah. So you buy a nicer camera. Is that really going to help out with like how the story is shot? Not really. And I think this is such a trope now too. Everyone talks about this. It's like, gear doesn't matter. There's like this whole like era and wave where everyone's like, gear doesn't matter. And then it's kind of flipped back and it's like, gear does matter.
Gear is everything.
And it's like, gear's always mattered to a certain extent if you know what you're doing with it, right? Like, here's a perfect example. It's like, we were just on a recent job and we decided to go big because we had a little bit more budget to work with. Okay. So we're like, let's work with the Venice. Let's get like signature primes. Let's get like bigger. With that setup requires a lot more, not just more people, but more like time investment, understanding how that workflow works, right? So it's like, in a sense, you've kind of opened up the floodgates into what that looks like. So before, when we were just running with smaller cameras, for example, just like an FX3 and a gimbal, it's like you can fly very fast, right? You can move very nimble, get the shots that you need, blah, blah, blah. When you start to move to a bigger system, like a Venice and a signature primes, a lens swap takes you like 5 minutes. Moving the sticks takes you 5 minutes. Yeah. So every decision you make is like a affirmative decision. If you make the wrong decision, it actually slows down the entire process. And then you're like trapped.
And time is money.
Time is
so you're wasting money. Like double.
Not only are you wasting your own time, but if you have to go overtime and reshoot stuff, it's like, it's annoying. It wastes your time. And then like, you don't want to be paying people, not that you don't want to be paying people extra, but the idea is that like, if you have a tight budget in terms of what you're working with, paying people extra just because you slowed down too much is going to cost you in the long run. Yeah. So it's about being strategic with like how you spend your time and money.
And that just looks bad on you too. Like the client's going to be like, I got paid more out of pocket because you messed up.
Yeah, it is.
No one likes that.
Yeah. And so like, you do have to look at, what your gears capable of doing with what you know how to like work with it, right? So it's like, know where the limitations are for that specific piece of gear that you have.
Yeah.
I think in the beginning too, I used to spend all my money on gear. I thought everything was gear related. Like everything I would do in my life, whether it's trying to get better jobs or more money, whatever it was related to gear. So I used to think like, if I just bought new things, people would see me in a different light and optically I would get more work. And that's like a very common thing, right?
Yeah, it's kind of fair. I kind of think that way as well.
Yeah. And why is that?
I think when you have better gear, or at least it looks like you have better gear, you kind of become a different echelon of like, oh, I'm not just like some regular guy with a camera. Like I'm like a proper professional with expensive gear. I can charge like a kit fee and stuff like that.
Yeah, and like that's kind of like a something that you learn over time, where like there's a boundary of what that looks like. For example, if you spend more money to buy better gear,
Mm-hmm.
no one really cares. So when you get into briefs with agencies and stuff like that, no one will ever ask you like, what camera are you gonna use?
That's right.
Like,
It doesn't really scale.
it doesn't scale like that.
Yeah,
They don't care, and like they just care like, can you execute and do the best of your capabilities to get the product done,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's like we're giving you money to just get it done. The last thing they care about is logistics of like how you're gonna do it.
Yeah.
And so they never come around like, what are you shooting with? Like maybe if they're like gearheads or something like that, but most creative people, they just never care about that. So what happens is you spend so much time thinking like, I'm gonna make this best looking thing possible, but are you really gonna be able to do that? Right? It's like, can you get a better visual or final outcome from like a smaller camera that can do more because you're comfortable with it versus getting like a mini LF and being like, oh, this is the thing that's going to make my stuff look better.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, the visual difference is going to be like 5% stronger because naturally different sensors or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like, is that enough of a difference for you to potentially lose shots because you can't get the shots that you want with this bigger setup?
I see. So what I'm hearing is that the more gear you buy, it kind of locks you into this one way that you're going to shoot something.
Yeah.
And you kind of prefer having that flexibility of getting different things. You value different
100%.
things here.
Yeah, the flexibility comes in knowing what you can do with the work, like you like what the gear is, right? It's like if I have an FX3, which is like does 95% of everything I want, and then you can actually get like the right gimbal movements from it, and you can get like the right shot angles because it's easier to maneuver and like prop up into like a higher angle versus like getting an LF or a Venice, for example, to run that on a Ronin is going to be so heavy, or like a Steadicam. Like you've just now added complexities to things that didn't need to be complex. And so again, it's like, is that trade-off difference worth it? That 5% visual difference when you don't have the actual skills or capabilities to run a bigger system, right? Like that's something that we learned over time, and like it's a constant repetition of like, we need to remind ourselves that you need to work within what you're comfortable with, and not what you think the world needs from you. Like we've learned this from watching professionals and like people that were higher up from us in the beginning, and they've spoken about this too. Of like, there's this moment in your career where you think like you need to make this big jump into this step of like how the traditional market should function to get these images. It's like, oh, I got to use a Technocrane, or I got to like use like Ukraine arms and stuff like that. It's like some things are safety related, which is fair when it's car stuff, but sometimes you're almost like building this world because you expect or think that the client wants that to look a certain way.
Sure.
At the end of the day too, it's like, if you're not even going to make them happy because the story's not done properly because you can't get the shots, they're going to be way more pissed off than being like, oh, we had a nice camera on set though.
True.
You know, so like the trade-off is much better leaning in terms of like getting the stuff that you need versus like optically what everyone thinks you're shooting on.
Okay, so let's go back a year then.
Yeah.
So we're back to where I was, and we just made our first couple $1,000s.
Yeah.
What would you recommend investing in then, if not gear?
Yeah. So this leads into a bigger question of like, what is the future path for you guys? Right. So it's not thinking about what you can do on a smaller scale. Buying a camera is kind of short term, and thinking about what you're going to do with your money. You have to think about what's actually going to push your business forward in very large incremental steps. Right. So it's like, how do you make this really big leap? And typically that's done through spec work, right? Or investing in work that actually like sets a style for yourself, right? If you're just constantly, for example, you buy an FX3, spend all the money that you had saved up. Now you're just going to continue to shoot the same type of work, whether it's like recaps or like these type of smaller projects, but now you just have a nicer camera. You haven't actually changed or elevated anything in terms of how the outside world sees your capabilities of work, right? No one's going to look at a new recap and be like, oh, they shot that on an FX3.
They leveled up.
They leveled up. Let's pay them more money. Let's suddenly give them like $100,000 job.
Yeah.
Like that's not how you do it. You have to spend time on what matters, which is like putting out work that showcases who you are, your voice, your style, and then using that to kind of leverage yourself above the rest, right? It's like everyone can compete on a camera. That's the easiest thing. Save a $4,000, whether that's like side work or like whatever it is. Buy a new camera. Now you're at the same skill level as everyone else. Okay, so now what? right? Like, how do you step above that? And typically that's like, you can only do that through showcasing your own work.
True.
I always say this too. It's like the perfect job will never show up at your doorstep, right? Like you need to actually go out and physically go create work to attract that clientele, because you can't take a portfolio of 5 random pieces, bring it to an agency or client and be like, imagine what I can do. Even though I'm showing you just recap work right now, I know I can do more, but how can they even see that?
It's just like a trust me.
Yeah.
Trust
No
me, I
one,
got it.
we don't play trust me games when like $50,000 is on the line, $100,000 is on the line. It's like you need to know this person is capable and can actually do the work that you're telling them you can do.
Yeah.
That's what investing in gear looks like, or investing in the wrong like physical things.
Yeah.
It leads perfectly into the next one, which is like investing in the wrong people.
That's number 2.
That's number 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go on.
So number 2 is investing in the wrong people. So this can be and lean in a lot of different directions. The biggest one is how you actually interact with like crew and stuff like that when you're first starting out.
Sure.
So have you dealt with hiring people, or like how do you even navigate that?
So when me and my friends were first starting, it was just kind of grabbing anyone who was in the vicinity. Like that was really the only qualification. It's like you're close by and you're also available to work that day.
Yeah.
Is that like enough, or should I be looking at more? Is there more that I need to vet or something like that?
Yeah. I would say there's like a graduation level here.
Okay.
So in the beginning, when you're first starting and you don't have any like parameters around this, and like you're just doing like basic spec work and technical spec work and stuff like that, it's totally fine. Like it's very difficult when you have absolutely nothing under your belt to just go out there and be like, let me grab like the top DP in the world, top like gaffer and stuff like that.
Yeah,
like,
come work on my like $500.
Yeah,
commercial.
not even. It's like, so, like I have no money at all, right? It's like that's that level you start at.
Yeah.
And so it's very realistic to just be like, who wants to learn? It's like early film days, right? It's film school days where you're just like, hey, we're in the same position right now. The barrier here is that like you want to learn. And so in the beginning, you're probably going to find the best people just in that range.
Yeah.
And then as you kind of start to build this like portfolio for yourself, then you can level that up, right? Then you can start to be like, okay, who's has a little bit more experience under their belt, is still down for like spec work in this capacity, and then work through it that way, right? So you are slowly, like as you're building yourself up, you're also building up with the people around you. And the thing with like learning, and this is where the whole investing and where this can financially hit you down the line, is when you find the right people, they elevate your work, they make your life easier,
Yeah.
and then the project gets a lot better,
Yeah.
right? And you only learn these skills through working on spec jobs, right? It's like you typically don't bring on new people to jobs that are important.
That makes
like
sense.
down the line, like you start to hit like the 10K range in terms of projects, and you're like, okay, we need to execute at a certain level. You need to make sure that the people are easy to be around. They're not going to mess up the energy. They're not going to look around and be like, start talking to client and like messing up the flow and stuff like that.
Well, they're like, like some random guy on set is just like,
Yeah,
talking
like
to
they're
them.
just gonna be talking to random people or like saying the wrong things, and like
Oh, yeah.
it's just general set etiquette, and you need to weed people out through doing those jobs through spec work, right? It's like
Yeah, makes
you have
sense.
low barrier, low pressure projects where you're all about just being like, I'm gonna see if this works out, right? It's like not a long term relationship. It's like a quick thing where you put them in a position where like, hey, maybe like it's obviously something they want to be doing long term. Maybe they want to be gaffing or whatever. It's like, this is your opportunity to work with these people now, figure out what their skills and their weaknesses are potentially, and then seeing like how you want to progress from there, right? So it gives you options and decisions, right? And I say this, like, these are the systems we built over time, and like what you need to do. You're pretty much like entry level producing, right?
Yeah.
You're building this Rolodex for yourself to just allow you to actually like figure out who works well with you, who doesn't work well with you. And then down the line, this is like your core team, right? Like as an example, it's like we worked with like Jordan, who was like our gaffer, and like since day one, pretty much.
Yeah.
And like 3-4 years later, he's still the person we're working with, right? And it doesn't matter even in the beginning. It's like people are like, we couldn't really pay Jordan that much in the beginning. He was doing a lot of projects on spec, but then we also brought him in for projects where it was paid as well. And so like over the years, we've probably paid him like north of like, I don't know, $50,000, somewhere
Holy.
like that. Just because we've done enough projects in the range of like, hey, we'll pay you here, you give us some favors here. And like, we've just done so many projects that he just shows up when he shows up. And like, that's the kind of relationship that you build, not just in like the world of directing and cinematography and stuff like that, but also as a business owner, as friends. Like everyone that you're going to be friends with 10, 15 years from now are going to be the same people you meet and work with right now. And the thing too is a lot of people get uncomfortable with the idea of like, I've worked with this one person one time and like you feel like you're locked in with them.
Yeah.
You don't have to be locked in with anyone. That's the whole point. It's like you're just testing everyone out and finding and like being like, oh, I think if we combo these two people together, they'd be great. Or like down the line and like why this is important. You will lose money if someone on your team ruins the relationship. It is that simple, right? It's like everything is relationship based, everything is experience based. If you allow bad seeds to kind of exist on set, it can just poison the entire system.
How so?
So here's an example too. It's like we were on a project and, you know, like things were going great until the very end. And then we actually had an experience where like someone was speaking to the actual like client.
Why would you ever want to do that?
Yeah. And it's like, and then it just soured the entire relationship a bit.
Between you guys and the client, or like you and
everyone. The whole experience is just down the drain now.
Yeah, okay.
It doesn't matter. Like it all it takes is one bad experience, and that one bad experience can taint the entire project. And so like being really reflective on like who you bring on set, who's vouched, who's allowed there, because it's really that easy. Like this was like a 6-figure project, and like that whole thing could be down the drain because of one person, and one person that we didn't have control of, right?
Yeah.
And
so
next
time that client's not going to come back to you guys.
Yeah, because like what are they going to remember at the end of the shoot? Like they got reamed out by some random person that was on set. And so it's just that simple. And then you're like, this is why you can never burn bridges in this industry, because the space is small. Everyone knows each other. Everyone works with each other. It's like you always have to be on your first impression kind of feeling of like, I'm putting my best foot forward. Everyone that we've ever worked with, you included, are in these positions of like working with us consistently because you brought the right work ethic from the beginning. You showed up, you cared, you didn't do sloppy stuff on set, the proper etiquette. You showed up to like actually give energy back and made our lives easier. Because if you make our lives more difficult, or we have to like, we're okay with training people in the beginning to like get to the right place, and like those are fine, but there's like a threshold of like, you're like the basic etiquette is very difficult. Yeah. Like I can't even have a conversation with you because you're just kind of off the rails or whatever.
Yeah, that's not even like a set thing.
That's not even a set thing. It's just like a common decency. Like, okay, we need like common sense. Don't walk in front of the camera when we're rolling. Like there's things that happen, and you're like, you know, in the union world, it's like 3 strikes type of thing. Like no one tells you on your first strike, on your second strike, someone's like, hey, you're on strike 2 already. Like, and then now you're really on edge. Yeah. Because if you make one more mess up, you're out completely.
Scary.
And I'm like, I'm not even in union. I'm pretty sure that's how it works though. But at the same time, I know it's not making stuff. I just don't remember exactly if that's it. But there's like a 3-strike rule there. And so we kind of think of it in the same capacity in our space, even if we're not specifically like in the union. It's like sometimes you have less than 1 strike.
Yeah.
Wait, that's
you might really
mess
something up.
If you really mess something up and like the energy is completely off, like, okay, we don't need to tell you a second strike. You just won't end up on set anymore. True. And sometimes people are just like, why don't you work with us again? It's like, you made our lives a lot more difficult than it needed to be. And like in opportunities where, you know, you only do X amount of shoots a year. And so like, if you made one of 15 projects a bad time to be around, I'm going to remember that. Like everyone's going to remember that.
It's not worth it.
It's not worth it, right? Yeah. It's like, and like, I get it that everyone has kind of different base levels of like what it means to be like, you know, quote unquote, normal, common decency, like common sense type of thing. But at the same time, it's like, if you've been around enough sets, or if you're like new completely, still you'd rather be more conservative in the sense of like, don't go crazy energy, right? Like keep it even keel, like show up, try to be like attentive to the work, see what you can do to like help out people. If you see like someone struggling, fixing a camera, it's like, what can I do? Like, do you need any like cables or anything? It's like, that's the stuff that helps us and doesn't detract from the experience.
But also not like overstepping and.
Yeah. I've had people on set while I was directing, completely new, tell me to do certain shots. Yeah. Because they thought it was their time.
Like, who do you think you are?
Like I've spent the last 4 weeks thinking about this project. Yeah. You showed up for 1 day. Yeah. And then like the relationship that we have outside of work is very different from what we do on work. Absolutely. Whether respect or regular work, it's like we're here to show up properly, and it's a profession where like, again, your reputation is everything. So if you're coming in here changing the entire dynamic, and like not knowing the etiquette of like, don't tell the director what to shoot because you think it's interesting. It's like, we're not necessarily in this buddy space right now. The dynamic is different. Like we have a structure here that works for a reason. So we need to keep that structure or everything fails.
So what I'm getting is like, you have to invest in the, not necessarily the right gear or the people. You have to invest in the right things. But I feel like for myself, even now, I'm kind of like just throwing things in the dark, trying to figure out like what sticks, right? Like how can I develop a system that makes sense so I'm not just like stumbling around, like hoping this investment is not going to absolutely screw me over in the long term?
Yeah, I would say even for ourselves, like we've spent probably more than 25K on specs that we've never put out.
What?
Yeah, just because it's like in the beginning we were also just throwing things out there, and like
Yeah.
we spent so much time thinking of ideas that ultimately didn't work out in the edit or post, or we didn't even shoot it properly. And so like over the years we've actually built out our cinematic portfolio mastery cohort, which is actually following our exact frameworks and systems to teaching how to actually create spec work with intention. And the intention is the biggest part here, because a lot of people just end up creating spec work that they don't know how to market. They don't know how to actually approach it in a more sophisticated, like real spec work way that actually gets you work. And that's the biggest thing. If you're just wasting time putting out spec work and it's not being used to market or it's not being used to elevate your portfolio, then it's kind of just a waste of time. And a lot of people do this where like they create something, it just sits there, or they don't even want to post it. And then they realize like, okay, then spec work's not the way. But that's not true. Spec work is the way. It's just you might not be doing it the right way. So like following these frameworks that we've created over the years allows you to just follow this systematically, finish it over 8 weeks, and actually from there showcase how to actually market and sell it to the right people.
So you're like making like an actual spec during this.
That's the whole point. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool.
So by the end of it, you create your own spec, and then we actually show you how to sell it, market it, use it to actually elevate who you are, and now steer a new direction in terms of like what you want to do as a filmmaker.
I could have used this a year ago,
Yeah, you could have.
but I guess it's here now.
But now you know.
Yeah.
Now you know. We've kind of thrown you into the deep end to show you like how to build work out. But like, sometimes it's fun to be, just trying new things and learning on the way.
I think another really big thing, especially for me, when I was first trying to break into the industry, as a director, especially, I was working like a service job too, because I have to pay the bills. Toronto gets expensive, but I was in the two minds of like, do I need this job to stay afloat, and is it taking away from my passion
to grow.
and my pursuit of this full time? Like, should I go full time on this, quit my other job, and just put all my energy into this, or should I like maintain that balance?
Yeah.
What is the right thing to do in this scenario, in your opinion?
Yeah. Even in the cohort groups that we teach and everything too, a lot of people are still coming from a space of like, hey, I'm currently still working, or I'm doing a job on the side, or I'm not doing this full time yet. And I'm like, yeah, don't quit your job yet. Like if you have a golden goose that allows you to actually spend your time creating on the side and you have enough bandwidth for that, then like that's like the perfect setup. Because similar to the idea of like you're kind of messing up on specs so you can like really show up on the right jobs and stuff like that. This gives you that kind of backing to not stress about, hey, do I have money to pay the bills? It's very difficult to be creative. It is a very creative industry where if you're thinking about like, can I even afford to eat?
Yeah.
You're not thinking about being creative. Like those ideas suddenly shift very quickly because now you're in this like super pressure cooker space. And like, that's just not a great place to work in. And it's like, for a lot of people, they are already working on maybe like an adjacent side of things. Like maybe they're a DP full time for like a company, and then they're like to do stuff on the side. What I'd like to say too, for a lot of people that ask about this is, if you have a side job or whatever it is, a 9 to 5 right now, if your real long-term like goals are to actually become like a DP, a cinematographer, whatever it is, focus on minimizing your bandwidth for what the job entails. Like you don't need to put 150% into your job right now.
That's true.
If your long-term is actually trying to become like a filmmaker or whatever, like try to find more ways to get the job done. Don't get fired, right? Like still put in enough work that like everything goes smoothly, and like, but if you're not trying to level up, if you're not trying to climb the ladder of corporate retail or whatever it is, it's like, just don't do it, right? It's like, just focus on get it done, save as much energy as possible so you can go home with energy and be like, let's work on what I actually enjoy now. Because I think that's a lot of what people do. It's like, even when you start to do full-time work, there's a difference between what money jobs are and what like passion spec jobs are.
What's the difference?
So a lot of people they get into this filmmaking space or like, you know, videography, whatever it is. And if they're getting jobs like recaps and stuff like that, or things that don't truly align with their long-term goals, then what they do is like, because you get told like, do your best on everything. It's like, slow your roll. I would actually not do my best on a corporate job. Like I would do what I need to do. Right. And it's like, it's good. Like here's a good example of it too. A lot of people, they'll do work and like, they'll just spend hours just like moving kind of like edits around and like, and then you send it to the client. They're like, I'm just going to change the whole thing up.
Oh yeah, that's me.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you get absolutely fried because you're like, I just spent the last 12 hours getting this edit and I think it's the best edit. And suddenly this client doesn't care about my edit.
Yeah.
They have a very specific vision for them. This is probably the most common thing I hear anyways, because it's like, well, you know, what do I do now? It's like, well, you didn't need to go that hard. It's like, you just follow a very specific system, which is like, you get a general assembly or a rough cut, send a client, do the revision, send a client, do the revisions, you're done. It's like, don't put your life and soul into
it. Doesn't need to be like a
V1.
masterpiece.
It's not a masterpiece. Like if you're not trying to become the best corporate or like real estate videographer in the world, it's like, you don't need to spend that much time on this. It's like, you need to know where your alignment goes and what your North Star of your creative vision is, to be like, I know I want to be a commercial cinematographer or director down the line. And I'm currently doing this. And I know I'm just going to put this space in my brain that's just for corporate money work. And I'm not going to spend more time trying to like shove creative energy into this.
Yeah.
Like I'm not doing specialty jobs on a real estate, like specialty shots and all these like crazy movements into a real estate project when it's not what I'm trying to like build as a career.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen is like, you're not even going to post it. Right. In the beginning, what happens is everyone posts everything, right? It's like, yeah, I'm going to post this because it makes sense. I need to show people I'm working. Eventually down the line, like after your first year or two, you realize like you're going to get burnt out. You hate the things you're shooting. And then you're like, this can't be the forever thing. And this is like the pivot point for a lot of people. It's like split in the road where it's like, I'm just going to keep burning myself out doing this one thing. Or I'm going to decide like, this is who I am. This is what I want to become. And I'm going to start focusing more energy into that. So suddenly your energy shifts from like putting all your like energy into these money jobs and then starting to like, all right, I could just do just enough. Make sure everyone's still happy. It's like, I'm not saying kill your like account management and all this stuff. Make sure clients are happy so you get more work. But at the same time, take that money back to that point one, take that money and now spend it on things that matter, right? Like start building a reel for yourself, like projects that actually matter, that showcase who you are. Because that's going to be way more beneficial long-term.
Yeah. Cause I suppose if you're wasting all this time going so ham on a 30-second recap that no one's going to care about, you're also wasting time not doing like other things like outreach or research or whatever it may be. Yeah.
It's a very intentional step to be like, I'm going to change up who I want to be and how I want to approach this. Cause like I said before, no perfect project ever lands in your lap. If you're doing only recaps now, you're not suddenly going to get a car commercial. No one ever links that, right? It's like an agency will look for directors that specifically do car commercials, and not even just car commercials in a very specific genre.
Yeah, specific tone.
A very specific tone, a voice, right? It's like if you want to go to Volvo, it's like, yeah, most car commercials are going to do like the standard rolling shots where like, you know, it's just like, oh, feature. Yeah. But then you have like brand launch campaigns, which is like Volvo talking about like how their features save lives or like these, like how it affects this family's whole entire life. Like you can't just find that randomly through a standard videographer. That like, I know this because I was that person.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'm going to get these crazy Lululemon brand campaigns. I'm shooting like coffee shop commercials.
Yeah, no one's going to look at like your barber shop sizzle reel and be like, he can like, direct this Volvo ad.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? So like sometimes like that's such a simple concept that you need to get over for your limiting beliefs of like, oh wait, I need to prove it to someone, right? It's like optics is such a huge thing. And I know we talked about this in the camera side of things. Camera optics does not affect you as much as like what your portfolio and your reel looks like, right? How people actually perceive you. Because if you could show that you can do a Volvo ad because you did a spec version of it, it means that most likely if they love that story already, you can evolve that into an actual like campaign. That pretty much leads perfectly into the next one, which is like not knowing where your goals are as a production company or even as a director.
Okay.
Because it's so easy to just do whatever comes your way.
Oh yeah. I'd be doing whatever every day.
Yeah. And a lot of people follow this path too, is like because you haven't niched down into something, it makes it very difficult for people to like know who you are. And so an example is back then I didn't know who I was. So I was just like, I started to direct more stuff. So I was like director. I was also putting photographer in my bio as well.
It's like the 7 slashes.
Yeah, the 7 slashes, right? And like I used to get messages like, oh, like do you do like wedding stuff as well? It's like, oh, do you do like photography? And I'm like, wait, I actually do photography, but as a hobby. And like it's just so clear how you brand yourself is a very clear definition of like how people see you.
True.
Right? Like why would anyone expect any more from you when you say you're a director? They're gonna expect you to be a director. Right? And then your work is actually your portfolio to prove that you are that person. Right? If I said I was like a photographer as well and I had photos, yeah, cool. They can make the connection. And like now it's their decision up to them whether or not they want to hire you based on your work and your quality, your skills, whatever. But if that's not something that you want to be doing more of, then you should just take it out completely. Like I didn't want to ever do photo for work and get paid for it because I didn't like the dynamic of like how it made me feel. I just liked it as a hobby. But when I actually had to like provide real deliverables on the photo side, it just gave me the ick because I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing really.
Yeah.
Right? I could take candid photos, so I was getting paid for like that stuff. But when people are like, oh, like we need like lights and it's like a whole system and stuff like that.
You're like, whoa.
Yeah, it's
That's
like,
not what I said.
that's not who I am anyways. Like I really wanted to become a director. I just put in photographer because I was trying to find money somewhere.
Because you're a little desperate.
Yeah, I was a little bit desperate for money. Like you do that game where you're like, this.
Yeah.
And then I often ask people in like the cohort as well of like, okay, you have like 7 things here. It's like, I know you can do this stuff. Like I know you can be a drone operator. I know you can be a colorist / AC / DP / director.
Whoa.
Like, what would you be the happiest to actually do?
Yeah.
Right? Is it like creating ideas and being creative, working with teams to figure out like, how do I actually get this story, this brief, and like turn it into something real? Or do you like being a little bit more logistics and like working with teams to figure out how to create this image?
Yeah.
Right? Because some people, like for example, like Zach doesn't like really interacting with like talent and stuff like that, right? Because like he cares more about like how do I build the world, how do I work with my team to like get the best looking image. And that's the beauty of this. Like if you're working as a specialist, you know exactly what you're going for as well. And so this levels all the way up. If I'm a director, I know I want to be a director. I'm going to do everything in my power to become the best director possible.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean I have to like learn every single detail about how to light it or gaff or like, you know what I mean? It's like, those are some skills you learn along the way, but like the strongest directors out there only really think about directing. And like all they're looking at are references to like elevate their skills or like learning new scene sequences or like elevating their way of like speaking to talent and like learning how to direct better. It's like, if I also had to learn how to become the best photographer, how to become the best DP and drone operator, and I wasn't even really trying to get that work, I'm wasting so much time.
So much time and energy.
For stuff that like I don't truly want to or even care about.
Yeah.
It's like you're just making your life way more difficult. And often people think just like, if I open this up to the world, if you're someone for everyone, you're actually someone for no one, right? It's like no one trusts generalists as much as they do a specialist.
Absolutely.
So you just double down on like, it takes a little bit of self-awareness to figure that out. But like figure out who you are.
And even within that world of like specifying like what role I want to be. Like I knew I wanted to be a director. And then when I was a little earlier on in my career, I was like, I will take anything just so I have a few more reps and a few more things in my portfolio to show for, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing because you kind of got to know how to do all these things, but also that's kind of like the steps you need to take to figure out who you really are. But now I'm kind of there. Like I know I want to be a sports director. Like I want to tell stories about sports and stuff like that. So you need to specialize in that as well, so that people within those positions of like sports teams or like athletic wear, whatever it may be, though they kind of recognize you as, oh, this is a guy who could potentially tell our stories really well, as opposed to a director who does all these million different things.
Yeah, exactly. You just need to double down on who you are, and it takes some time to figure that out oftentimes. Like even before you start working here, if we didn't like help you and work together to narrow down like just eliminate all that other stuff. Just work on this and like just spend all your time doing that. It's like you could potentially be in limbo forever.
Yeah.
Because then you're just like, no one's telling you to just like, hey, stop all that and just look at what you want to do, right? Which is why it goes back to like the whole idea of the North Star, right? It's like, who are you? What's your company represent, right? And it's like, if you want to be, you know, you would look at like a lot of production companies out there, kind of reverse engineer, look at what exists out there, and you're like, oh, this company only focuses on like narrative storytelling that like is a little bit more emotion driven, or it's like for ad councils or whatever it is. That's like you're trying to hit a very specific log line at the end. It's like that's all they do and that's all they specialize in. And so when companies or agencies are looking specifically for that approach, they don't need to look around much more.
Yeah.
They're just gonna go to the best person for it, right? And that really is something that you need to nail down over and over again.
Yeah.
But like also with the intention that like things can change, right? Like you a year ago is very different from you this year.
Absolutely.
Right. And same for me too. It's like it took me such a long time to realize like, oh, fashion and sports, that's it. Like I did that Cadillac spec commercial and I'm like, oh, I hate this.
Yeah.
Like it's very quick, right? It's like
Yeah.
the process tells you everything. And like, you know, in the beginning it's just like, oh, it's all about the journey and stuff like that. And then it's like, oh, it's all about the destination. And then it's like it just doesn't really work out all that long. And you realize like it's just better to just try and like just keep doing work. It's an output game, right? It's like you do enough projects, you realize like, okay, I like pieces of this, pieces of that. I think when you like start out, you're meant to try everything. After a year, narrow it down a little bit more.
Yeah.
After a year, like narrow it very down to like not even just like specifically the style, but like the genre, the voice, whatever it is. You need 3 to 5 projects to like really showcase like who you are, what you want to do.
Yeah, and obviously you're not gonna get there like right away, but
yeah,
even I found it was really helpful because you guys told me to have a bit of like intention when I'm approaching my work, because even though I am still figuring like all of these things out, I'm keeping in mind that I have to be taking specific things and not just like doing them for the sake of doing them.
Yeah,
because even like I was on a job earlier this year for just like a random commercial about this random product. But even from those things, I've like learned certain aspects of storytelling that I like, this and that. Like I really like doing montage commercials, but I don't like doing like specific like product or more like relationship type stuff. Like it's not really my vibe.
Yeah.
But because I'm actively thinking about it and you guys told me like just think about these things, now I know like I don't want to do these things. It didn't take me 5 projects to figure that out. I'm not wasting time doing like random specs about like Tinder ads or stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
If you don't debrief fast enough, then you're just guessing, right? It's like I like to debrief as soon as possible, even after every project, even after every day. I like to debrief, even if it's by myself, to be like, okay, there's some things here that didn't work out, and like, you know, the stuff I was talking about earlier about like not working with like larger cameras and stuff like that. Like, it's a reminder, right? It's like we didn't get through X amount of shots, or we didn't finish this because of what, right? And then you have to kind of come at it in a very neutral sense, like. If you have very strong feelings for things, it could be a trap, right?
I think the worst thing for me, I've been making a lot of treatments recently from scratch, and it is the absolute worst when you spend all this time making like this beautiful deck and you think this is the one, is gonna get me the $10,000 job, and then you send it to the client and they're like, oh, it's cool, but no. And then you like spent like these last 3 days working on this thing from scratch, and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. Funny enough, that's actually why we created Set Memory, which is like our whole library of all of our pre-production, our director's treatments, all these things that actually help us in the front end so we can spend more time focusing on the creative.
Yeah.
And the worst thing, like you said, is actually working on director's treatments and being like, I have 3 days to work on this, and I got to do both the graphic design work as well as the writing and finding the right assets and everything. It's like, that's such a waste of time, especially when you only have a limited amount of it. And so we found these 6 templates that we've created with our template creator, and they pretty much are this foundation of like winning director's treatments.
Yeah.
And so we've spent the time like dialing this stuff in, knowing it works, building it out to actually look like expensive director's treatments that you would actually see created from like real graphic designers and stuff.
And these are like the actual treatments that you use to pitch.
Yeah. So we've broken these all down into actual functional ones on Keynote, where you can just go in, change up your photo assets, make sure you actually find the GIFs that look and sell right, and focus more on the creative versus all the, you know, little details like moving text around or which is the right text. We kind of have everything built up for you guys.
And you're just telling me this. You didn't tell me
Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, yes. But let's get back into it. So I'll also say you just want to know when to pick and choose your battles and pick the right ones that actually push your career forward. And the ones that don't or aren't as important, just do what you need to do and keep pushing forward, because this is really a game of attrition, right? Like just keep moving forward.
Yeah.
I don't even think I used that word properly. Yeah, this is a game of like just being in the game as long as possible.
Yeah.
So like you're not going to become the best filmmaker in 1 to 2 years. Like that's going to come after time. In 3 to 5 years when you start to see things really show up and like blossom. But you can get there faster, right? If you just avoid the mistakes of like not draining and burning yourself out on jobs that don't matter.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of money jobs, I think a big thing that I was struggling with as well was we would have all these jobs and they would kind of pay, kind of wouldn't, if you get what I'm trying to
What
say.
does that mean?
It's like they would pay us like this tiny little budget, and then maybe we would have money to, pay ourselves a little bit. Maybe we would have a little bit of money to buy some lunch for the day, but it wouldn't be like these like huge profits that like everyone was like, okay, we can make like a living off this. This is like something we can do like casually and like maybe build towards something.
Yeah.
But it was always like not enough for it to be a living unless we were doing like crazy amounts of jobs in the month. But that just never happened.
For sure.
So what am I doing wrong in this scenario?
Yeah. I think I have a sense of like your story a little bit. But if you want to let everyone know what kind of like jobs you were working on, what type of jobs you were working on.
So it would be like not necessarily contract stuff. I didn't sign anything that I had to keep doing these monthly, but it was like a monthly retainer. And we would either be doing recap videos when the people we were working with was like throwing like an event or something like that. Or usually it would just be like small social assets here and there, whether it is that recap video or maybe it's like some photos here and there.
Yeah.
It's like we would have like the creative control to like kind of do what we wanted, but not necessarily the budget to do anything crazy beyond like bringing a camera, maybe bringing like not even like a light, like a bounce or something like that, and just making the most of what we had, and then just like making something cool in the edit.
Okay.
But not necessarily like production. We never had that like. We're never ever able to budget for that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So this is like a classic conundrum of like sub 1,000, especially when you have to start working with people.
Yeah.
Right. Like in the beginning, you kind of work solo. You do stuff for like a couple $100, maybe $200-300. You can get away with that with a camera. And then if you are aware of like the actual world of filmmaking and production, then you're like, okay, this is where you start grabbing your friends and stuff like that. And that's probably where you were. It's like, hey, there's some friends that like we all went to school together or whatever. It's like, I think we can all do and handle different things. I can focus on X part of the business and then move on. This person could do on like the camera or whatever it is.
Yes.
And then the conundrum here is that like, you get paid like $500.
Yeah, it's like the same amount pay.
Yeah.
Just like 5 times the amount of people now.
And now you've expanded the team, but now you're like, we barely had enough money before as a solo person.
Yes.
And so now it feels like you're tricked into this space where like, I can't even pay anyone, but now you feel bad. It's like, it's just super common in that sense. And there's 2 ways to look at this. Number one is like, there's always a different client out there. And so a lot of people get stuck in the space of like, you're going to the easiest, most accessible person to find these jobs because maybe you're acquainted with them, or like that was a world that you were already in.
Yep.
Sometimes you're just not the right client. And so you're going to start getting clients that are like, $500 is a lot, $1,000 is a lot, $10,000 is a lot, because if it's a small business, you're taking it out of their pocket. Like that's money that can go towards their kids or like the business, whatever. Like that's what they're mentally more or less making that equation off of. It's like, can I spend $3,000 on this campaign? Even though realistically, if it's a really strong campaign and it's done well, it's going to get them back that money and more, right? Like that's ultimately the goal. It's like they're making like educated guesses more or less on like whether or not they're going to get the return back on their spend. It's very tricky in this place because you can either really continue to push and be like, hey, can I raise the rates here? It's like there's a level and a threshold where you're just going to get X'd out. Like you're going to push to a point where like it's $1,000 and you're like, they only really have $500. And like to them, that's maybe already a lot for them.
Yeah.
And so like, are you going to keep fighting for this $500, or are you going to actually like just find better or different clients that $1,000 means nothing to them? Right. And then it makes your life a lot easier because as you kind of go up in scale, easiest clients become ones that like the money is not the issue anymore. Like, can you just execute on the jobs? And so number one for most people, it's like just look for a different industry, right? If you love recaps and stuff like that, it could be very tricky.
Which I don't.
You actually don't probably. So it's like, okay, what does that mean, right? It's like right now you might just be a generalist, and that's how it's presented to the world.
Yeah.
And so it's just looking back at your portfolio and what you put out to the world, because like whatever you put out is what people see.
Yeah, and that's definitely what it was, because it wasn't like these guys are doing this specific type of event.
Yeah.
It was more like,
I know people that
I
do
know
video.
people who own a camera.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so like that's the trap too, because you do this crazy math in your head where you're like $500 for this one day thing. I can edit it in like a day. Great. If I just do 25 of these in a month, I'll be rich. Yeah. Like that's just like the classic, like, oh, like that's not what's going to happen. You're going to do one project. You have to do the account management for this. The edit's going to take you longer than expected. The shoot's going to drain you. Suddenly you're like 2 weeks into the month and you're like, I only just did this one $500 project.
Yeah.
And then you're like, then what happens is you start chasing. You're like, oh, you guys gonna pay yet? Like, or like, oh, do you have any more of these projects?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like that time you've spent editing this $500 project, you could have been networking, you could have been reaching out, you could have been focusing on yourself and figuring out like what it is you want to do more of. Like that's just like things you have to kind of figure out sooner than later. Sooner because the longer you do this, the faster you're gonna burn yourself out on. And then like understanding that some clientele and some concepts of like, you know, this specific genre is not going to get you that much money. Even if you're like top of the top, you're only going to get X amount more than if you specialize into a specific field that makes you more money. For example, you can become a wedding filmmaker. Okay. I know people in the range of like $2,000, $3,000, but they're only staying there because they don't want to elevate and do more of that. And so like they're happy doing the $2,000, $3,000. But I know friends too that do weddings for like $15,000. I've also seen people that do it for like $55,000. You're all shooting the same wedding, more or less. Like the wedding's a wedding, right? It's like, but it's how you kind of position yourself, it's how you brand yourself, it's how people know you for, right? So it's like we could become very high level like cinematographers that focus on weddings. And that's something that's very like is actually happening a lot more of now. And I'm seeing people do like more like they were cinematographers and then they're like the money play here is bring that world into weddings. And no one else has that kind of combination yet. So they can actually go and charge like 50,000 euros. Like it's not even Canadian. Yeah, it's like a legitimate career and you only need to do X amount more when it's like a 2-person crew, whatever it is. So it's looking at how you can leverage yourself and put yourself in the best position to actually charge the right amounts of money. So it's not just looking at like, I can do everything. It's like, what space or segment in the filmmaking space can I do the best of so people know me for this? So I can take advantage of like, you know, first person to do this. And now everyone knows me as like the leader in the space. Because eventually everything is kind of taken. So you just want to be able to do it I see this too. It's like, you're not really fighting against like the world. You're just fighting against like your local space. Like be better than everyone locally as you keep progressing over. Right. In the beginning, everything was reference wise. I was looking at just like, who's the local videographer around me? And I just got to do better than them. It's like, if I'm just fighting with that person all the time, we're just fighting over the same $500 project.
Yeah.
Right. And you're like, what's the point of this? Like, I remember doing some really shitty, schemy stuff where I was like trying to just like poach people's work and stuff like that. Cause I'm like, oh, you just did a video? Like, I'm going to hit you up and like, be like, if you need video, like, let me know. I can do it. And I was like, I just had no plan or structure or system to like, how do I get to that next stage? Right. And it took a lot of rejection and like years of figuring it out to be like, oh, it's not everyone else's problem. Right. It's actually my problem. Like,
I'm the problem.
I am the problem. Like, I'm not thinking bigger. I'm not thinking about what the future looks like. And so I've trapped myself into this little pocket where I'm like, I thought I was like hot stuff in the beginning, shooting these like gimbal videos. Cause if you can just do the technical, you're like, I did it.
Yeah.
You know, I was doing like transitions and like I was doing overnights, just like editing and trying to be the fastest. Being the fastest is like the worst thing you can do. That's the worst thing you can be. Yeah, it's like the worst thing because then people set this expectation of like, oh, you just do fast work. Like, can I get it tomorrow?
Yeah.
And you're like,
and you're doing fast work for like $500.
Yeah, not even. At some points, like I was doing it for like a couple hundred or free because I was just trying to get stuff out and beat people out, right? And then I just set myself up for failure because I'm like, I'm chasing the wrong thing here. I need to chase for like the highest level of success, which is like doing more, being better, right? Stop trying all this like new stuff that doesn't really add to you as like a filmmaker, and like really sit in and figure out who you are so you can double down on that. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. So like that's like the 5 biggest financial mistakes a lot of people make. It's just like when you don't have enough like structure in what you're doing, who you are, then everything kind of just goes askew. You start trying random different things, and like in the beginning it's fine, but over time you do need to specialize. You need to find the right people to work with. You need to invest in the right things, right? Learn how to work with rental shops and stuff like that. Like build relationships that actually benefit you both, right? It's like these are the little things that you need to focus on as you grow your business, as you become a director, cinematographer, whatever it is, because it will come back to hit you when you realize that like you don't have the right systems for this stuff. You could be in the hole in limbo forever, trying different things, and then realizing like I'm not making a sustainable career or business here that actually like pushes my business forward, or even more importantly, like you creatively forward, right? It's like you're just going about shooting recaps, and sure, if you love recaps, good for you, but we don't. So so we just have to make very intentional steps for that. So otherwise, yeah, that was 5 biggest mistakes. And if you guys are interested in watching more of this, we're gonna be doing a lot more long form, just kind of breakdowns in terms of filmmaking, how we run a business, how we build teams, how we actually like run productions and production breakdowns, because that's going to be a lot more fun to just show you the behind the scenes of how we function and how Tenfold actually works.